Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this panel on exploring librarianship as a profession. This panel is being co-sponsored by the IU Libraries and the Center for the Study of Global Change, and it's been co-organized by myself and the International Studies librarian, Charmaine Enriquez. I'm going to go ahead and introduce everyone, and then we'll get straight into it. So our panelists are Rebecca Hyde, who is a research and instruction librarian at Pius 12 Memorial Library. Rebecca has a bachelor's degree in English language and literature from the University of Virginia and a MLIS from Dominican University. She started her career as the Federal Documents Assistant at Northwestern University Libraries and then moved on to the University of California, San Diego, where she became the U.S. Government Information Librarian and later the Assistant Head for Data, Government, and Geographic Information Services. Currently, Rebecca is the Librarian for Political Science, Government Information, Criminology and Criminal Justice, Social Work, Pre-Law Studies, and Urban Planning and Development. Our next panelist is Scott Lipson, who is a Special Collections Librarian at Yale Divinity Library. Scott holds a PhD in history from Emory University, a master's degree in church history from Yale University, and a bachelor's degree in archaeology from Columbia University. Before beginning his tenure at Yale, Scott was the assistant head of collection management in the Columbia University Libraries and served as the subject specialist for history, religious studies, and Jewish studies at Indiana University Libraries. Our other panelist, another panelist is Megan Press, who is an undergraduate education librarian at Indiana University Libraries. Megan received her master's degree from the University of Michigan's School of Information and a bachelor's degree in music performance from Ithaca College. She administers IU Libraries' Information Literacy Grant Program and works closely with faculty and librarians to integrate information literacy throughout the curriculum in many different subject areas. Our next panelist is Teresa Quill, who is a map and spatial data librarian at Indiana University Libraries. Teresa earned her Master of Library Science degree from Indiana University Bloomington and holds a Bachelor of Arts in International Affairs from the University of Georgia. She provides discipline agnostic support for geographic information systems and spatial data across campus and acts as the library liaison to the Department of Geography. Before joining the libraries, Teresa served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Bulgaria. And our final panelist is Willa Libbard Tavernier, and she is a research impact and open scholarship librarian at Indiana University Libraries. Willa manages open scholarship resources at IU Bloomington Libraries and provides publication data and data analysis to library administration, as well as colleges and departments for institutional decision-making. Willa is committed to advancing inclusion and belonging in her work and research. Her research interests are equity, community, governance, and sustainability and scholarly communication. She develops scholarly communication bibliometric dashboards to support humanities scholarship and areas underserved by conventional bibliometrics, and works with faculty and graduate students in managing their research profiles and tracking and demonstrating the impact of their scholarly work. And that is our panelists for today. So to begin our questions for these lovely folks, I want to ask you all to tell us a little bit about your journey to librarianship and what drew you to it, and can you give us just a brief description of what it is that you're currently doing in your current jobs?
And I think I'm supposed to go first. Is that right, Rebecca? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me and us. So I came to librarianship a little bit by happenstance. When I was a college student, as Isaiah said, I majored in archaeology, and I was interested in finding some sort of work that related to my area of interest, which was basically history. As a result of that, I got a job at a rare book library within the university. And then kind of was thinking that I would probably pursue academia at some point in my life. And so I went on to do a master's degree and just thought, well, I might as well continue the sort of work that I was doing. And that led me to a job in another rare book and manuscript library where I was basically processing manuscript collections. And I mean, it was a wonderful job. I really learned a lot. In both of these instances, though, I had wonderful mentors who really kind of taught me about librarianship, various aspects of librarianship, and really kind of were willing to continue a relationship with me after I left these jobs and support me as I looked for careers. After I got that master's degree, because I had this background in libraries, I kind of wound up with a different sort of library job where I was overseeing what was called the Periodicals and Microforms Reading Room at Columbia. And so that led me to have interactions with all different other kinds of librarians. So like subject specialists, people who are working in acquisitions, people who are doing cataloging type work. So that really kind of informed my understanding of librarianship. I was still interested in pursuing an academic in pursuing a job in academia, and so I went on to do a PhD in history, knowing though that I really had an interest in libraries. So while I was doing the PhD, I kind of kept a foot in librarianship, and I worked in a digital humanities lab. And all of this kind of helped me when I reached the end of the PhD and was looking for jobs. I was interested in both kind of getting a professorial type of job and also working in libraries. But because I had this background in this diverse, all these aspects of librarianship, I was a fairly strong candidate, I think, for jobs within this particular field of librarianship, namely being a subject librarian for history. I probably couldn't have applied to really any other job. That was a wonderful experience at IU. I was there for about 4.5 years. We got some experience doing the collection development, buying books and the like. Got experience doing instruction as a librarian, and that allowed me to help me get my current job, where I am in charge of a special collections repository. We have public services. We have researchers who come in to use our manuscript and rare books. We put on exhibits. We have classes come into the special collections, and we teach them how to use the archives, how to do research using special collections. And then I also am in charge of developing the collection. So acquiring other manuscript collections, acquiring rare books through either purchases or gifts. So yeah, so I'm sorry if I talked for too long. It's tough to kind of summarize here the last 20 years of your life.
No, that was great. Thanks, Scott. Megan, would you like to go ahead and share your answer?
Sure. So I got into librarianship because when I was leaving music school, there were a lot of orchestras going on strike, among other things. It was right in the middle of the recession. And I didn't want to continue into, so total fault of my proofreading, not the fault of anyone else's, but I actually have a master's of music performance degree. I'm a clarinetist by training. And I didn't want to continue into a performance doctorate, a doctor of musical arts, because I didn't really want to be a professor. I wanted to be a performer. But those are not, there's not a lot of those jobs just kind of hanging around, particularly when people are going on strike right and left and center. So I started thinking about library school. I went to library school thinking that I was going to be a music librarian. What can you do with a master's of music performance degree if you are not going to be a performer for your pay? And it was like, well, there's always, I guess I can be a librarian. And so that's what I went to music school or to library school with the intention of doing. Sort of cue a very long series of comical doors closing in my face to librarianship, music librarianship. Enter stage left, I guess, a wonderful teacher who I'm still in close contact with, who helped me to see the possibilities of what working with people in libraries might be like as an instructor. And I started to realize that one of the kind of through threads in my life is not just working with people, but working as a teacher in a lot of different contexts. And so when I left library school, I took a job at a very small college in a very remote place where I got to do all kinds of stuff that you would typically never let somebody fresh out of library school do. But because I was the only, that was one of 3 people there, then I got to do it. And kind of landed at IU after about 5 years in that experience, where I work with some of my responsibilities are primarily undergraduates. They're all 35,000 of them fall under my umbrella, which, if that sounds like an impossible number, it is. So I have to get kind of creative. I work with My interest is in information literacy, particularly in curricular experiences. There's other parts of my department that work in the co-curricular experiences, but my expertise is in pedagogy, it's in program planning, it's in sort of the curricular integration of information literacy and libraries as a learning environment.
Thank you so much, Megan. Teresa, would you like to share?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the next question, so I'll kind of keep it short. But I worked in libraries starting in high school. Actually, I have a little bit of public library experience, shelving books and working the circulation desk. Those were always my high school, college jobs that I really enjoyed. And as was mentioned, I have a bachelor's in international affairs, so I'm one of you. I always planned to probably go to grad school. I was thinking I would do conflict resolution and probably work for USAID or the UN. So when I finished my bachelor's degree in late 2007, 2008, and the financial crisis was hitting, I joined the Peace Corps because that seems like a nice, easy way to get 2 years of international experience, which is what all the jobs I was looking for required, at least 2 years of international experience to even consider applying. But then you had to get one of those jobs to get international experience. So Peace Corps was a really nice way to get that when I basically just had my undergraduate degree. So while I was in the Peace Corps, long story short, and again, I'll come back to this, I realized that that's not a good fit for me, and just kind of always had libraries in the back of my head. So when I finished my time in Bulgaria, I moved with my partner at the time, or now my husband. I moved with my person to Bloomington for him to go to grad school. And when I was researching grad schools to help him find a program in Central Eurasian Studies, I was like, I think we should go to IU because they also have a really good library school, just in case I decide to go to library school, which is what happened. I got my master's degree here, and we were that classic Bloomington story of I'm just going to get in, get out, get my degree. And that was 15 years ago, and we are still here in Bloomington. So I, during library school, happened across a staff position in the map department. I always thought, well, if I'm going to do public libraries, or if I want to do librarianship, I'll work in public libraries. And academic librarianship had never really occurred to me until I just kind of happened on this job right before the deadline, and ended up working in the Wells Library map collection. And that kind of turned into a visiting librarian position, and then permanent line librarian position that was kind of created a little bit as the demand grew. So here I am still. Oh, and my job now, I manage the map collection, the print map collection in Wells Library. I work with the geography department as like a traditional liaison librarian, but a lot of what I do is focused on GIS and spatial data. So I teach a lot of software tech workshops. I do one-on-one consultations with faculty and students from all kinds of different departments, talking about how they might use maps or spatial data in their research. A lot of, here's how you use this software. Have you thought about doing this type of analysis? So it's a pretty wide-ranging type of thing where I have primary source, kind of rare maps responsibilities, and this more technical side of my job too.
Thanks so much, Teresa. Willa, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Well, my bio basically describes the job content that I do. In terms of my path to librarianship, I always tell people I'm an accidental librarian. It's very true. I was a practicing attorney for about 15, 16 years, and I was heavily involved in knowledge management at my firm. And I wanted to get more formal training on information management and knowledge management and metadata and things like that. And I decided to go and do this degree. So just a little bit of background. I also have a Master of Laws in International Legal Studies. So I have that sort of little crossover with international studies as well as my other legal degrees before I started my Master of Arts in Library and Information Science. While I was away, so I had been working in the British Virgin Islands at a firm there while I was away. Two like massive hurricanes hit and destroyed the island. And I started working remotely because I'd finished all the credits for my librarianship degree, but I couldn't actually physically go back. The airport wasn't functional, our offices had been destroyed, our home had been destroyed. And I started a graduate certificate in college teaching just to stay in status in the US. And I'd been volunteering in both public libraries and at the University of Iowa Conservation and Preservation Department. And our associate university librarian, who I got along well with, she looked at my resume and she said, your skills are really suited for scholarly communication. And had she had my resume before, she'd have actually encouraged me to apply for scholarly communication librarian that they recently hired. In any event, she really acted as a sponsor, and she created a student specialist position for me, and I started working in scholarly communication, and I worked there for the rest of my time. So a year, I worked there for a year. I started thinking more seriously about going into librarianship. Then, given the circumstances, I sent out a few applications. I was really sort of pulled to the position I initially started at IU, which was a visiting open scholarship diversity resident librarian, and a position for an education librarian at University of Iowa, because I had done, all my last set of credits with the education department. But I went for this one, and sort of similar to Teresa, it was turned into a permanent line after about 2.5 years, and that's why I'm still here.
Thanks, Willa. Before we move on to the next question, I just want to point out the information that Charmaine dropped in the chat. We have Howard Rosenbaum here with us today, who is the director of the graduate programs in information and library science. If you're already here, you must have some interest, but just in case you don't know, there's I think 19 dual degree programs at IU with the information and library science. So if you have any questions, Howard's information is there in the chat. Please get in touch with him. Howard, I know you have to leave early, but if there's anything you want to interject real quick.
Oh, I don't want to take time away. Just to say to anybody who's listening, if you're interested in a dual degree, I can explain the ILS side of it. Just contact me and I'm happy to talk to you. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks so much. So for our next questions, we'll just have 2 or 3 of our panelists answering those for the sake of time. And we'll have a little bit of time at the end in case there's questions from the audience. So for our next question, I'm going to direct this to Scott first and then Teresa. What steps did you take or what questions did you ask yourself to ensure that librarianship would be the best career for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that one of the most important things that is evidenced from what all of us have just said is that, you know, even though Willa described herself as an accidental librarian, and I guess I would describe myself to some degree also as an accidental librarian, but none of us actually ended up in our jobs just by kind of like, you know, pursuing something totally different and then jumping into a professional librarian job, right? We all had some sort of background and training that allowed us to get the jobs that we have. So for me, in particular, I had encountered various librarians that had. So I've had 3 professional librarian jobs, I guess. And in all of these cases, I've encountered people in the past who have had very similar jobs, and so I've kind of had a general sense of what these jobs are. So the questions that I was asking myself when I was at this kind of like crossroads of like, do I continue to pursue academia or do I go into librarianship? Some of them were about my kind of like work-life balance. I had a young son at that moment in my life, and the likely outcome of continuing to pursue academia was that I would have adjunct positions maybe for a while, probably if I was lucky, maybe get a postdoc. If I was really lucky, maybe the postdoc would last more than 1 year, right? Maybe 2 years, so that the kid would be, 2.5 or so by the time I was done, and then we would have to move somewhere else. Getting a library job made it more likely that we'd be able to stay somewhere long term. So that was one of the questions I was asking myself. Another was how I wanted to interact with. I knew I wanted to stay within an academic environment, but how did I want to interact with faculty and with students? Did I want to be teaching a semester-long course? And the answer to that was largely no. That's not really where my areas of interest lie. So my job tends now to be where I go into a classroom and I speak to students maybe for one session, maybe for a few sessions, but I'm not the one who's grading their work. I'm not the one who's really trying to motivate them to finish whatever their final assignment is, and that's not something that I personally enjoy doing, and it's not really something I'm good at. But then the other thing that I had to think about was what I'm giving up, what you're giving up whenever you pursue one career path or another, right? So in giving up the sort of academic path, I was very likely giving up a lot of my plans for I had written this dissertation, and despite what I may have said in my IU interview, the likelihood of actually publishing that dissertation became increasingly less likely once I got the library job. But if I gave up, if I gave up the library side of things, I would have also been giving up all of the like positives that I was just talking about. So the final thing that I wanted to mention is the questions that I asked myself. I think that one of the or the steps that I took to pursue this career, I think the sort of the most important thing that I did was mentorship and staying connected with people who are in the profession, who could give me advice about what I needed to do in order to be a good candidate for a particular position, what I needed to know about librarianship, what what the future of librarianship is to preview a question from later on. But yeah, it was those connections, I think, that really were perhaps the most important for getting to where I am now.
Okay, Teresa, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, so like I said, a lot of my path to librarianship had foundations from when I was a child, basically. But really, I made the decision to pursue that career during Peace Corps. I was teaching English as a second language in a small half abandoned factory town in Bulgaria. I was teaching middle school. It was absolutely like the most traumatizing job I've ever had. It was extremely difficult. And it was a time with a lot of just unstructured, yawning, open space of like, here, go out and create these programs that'll change people's lives and like save the world. And I really came into that experience thinking like, yeah, I'm going to save the world. And then very, very quickly realized that one is impossible for anyone, and two, not my strength. I really like embraced my introversion during that time of sitting alone in a post-communist freezing apartment, and did a lot of soul searching of like, well, I thought I really was invested in working internationally and having this focus and having travel and living abroad be a big part of my life. And if development work is not how I'm going to do that, like, then what do I do? Who am I? And I just kept hearing the voice of my previous supervisor at the Athens Public Library and mentor. Her name was Marianne Driver. Absolutely wonderful, wonderful supervisor. And she would always say, we're not dealing in hearts and lungs, people. Like, it's not that serious. Like, this is a library, just chill out. And I was like, that really that's how I want to work. Like, I want to have a job where I can have a positive influence in the world and in other people's lives, but like, no one's gonna really be that upset or die if I don't do my job. Which sounds like kind of a, like, I don't know, it felt like giving up a little bit in the moment, but it was a really freeing realization of like, I can do this job that's meaningful to me and meaningful to the handful of people who I interact with on a day-to-day basis. And I don't need to do more than that. I can, live a life outside of my work, and that doesn't have to be my identity. Librarianship just really seemed to fit that for me. So again, I was thinking about public libraries. I reached back out to some of my former supervisors. I really think one of the most important things, if you are considering a library job, is to work in libraries, like volunteer, any sort of staff position. But I think that really gives you a good sense of what's important and how libraries work. And like, I had no idea all the different types of library jobs that were out there until I kind of started working in libraries and got my degree as well. And then once I had the staff position, I didn't know that you could be a map librarian. Like, that's such a niche, random thing. And I was like, oh, okay, well, here's a great way I can fit this like international studies background. I can do research in different parts of the world. Like, this is great. So then really it was cold emailing other map librarians and being like, hey, this is what I want to do. Like, what do you recommend? I started joining some professional organizations and really just applying for a lot of different jobs, going on interviews I knew I probably wouldn't get the job for, but I learned a ton in that interview process, and was really, really thankful to have people who would kind of support and help along the way. And then, yeah, now I just kept kind of falling into jobs here at IU. So I think just any way that you can work in a library, see if it's a good fit, I think is a really great way to start.
Thanks, Teresa. I really want to second that. I feel like if you can have experience working or volunteering in a library, it makes such a difference in understanding it and also getting a job. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Librarian positions are generally multifaceted. How do you handle your responsibilities? And I'm going to send it right back to you, Teresa, and then we'll hear from Willa and Megan.
Thanks. Yeah, my position in particular, I mentioned that I do like kind of some special collections type work. I do some technology type work, some instruction. So it's lots of different types of jobs kind of all mushed into one. And it's not always graceful handling all the different pieces of the job. I tend to, like yesterday, I scheduled like all I'm doing is collection development. I'm just going to like really dig in and buy a bunch of maps. So kind of project managing myself, getting really good at defensive calendaring and blocking off time for myself to work on things has been important. And this is something that's gotten easier the longer I'm in my career, but figuring out how to say no to things and what things you can say no to has been really important. This is something that I didn't really feel like I could do, especially when I was in a visiting position and when I was pre-tenure. It felt really scary to turn down opportunities because it was like, but maybe that's the thing that gets this turned into a permanent position, or maybe that's the line on my CV that like is make or break between me getting tenure or not. And now on the other side, I'm like, I really wish I stressed about that less. I don't think any of those small committee appointments really mattered all that much for as much stress as I put over them. And part of that is having a supportive department and supervisor who can back you up on saying no to things and help you figure out what's important and what you can drop, because the demands on like really everyone in academia, but I can just speak to librarians, like there's kind of, for most of us, there's no ceiling on the amount of work we could be doing. So it's really up to you to place those limits on yourself to make sure you don't get burned out or overwhelmed.
Thanks. Willa, would you like to chime in?
Sure. I endorse everything Louisa said. I'm a typical sort of, I will take on too much, which is not good. So I find I have to use a lot of time management and calendar management in my work. So there's a lot of tools I use to prioritize. So I use Trello a lot. And I use that to prioritize what needs to get done in the next week or in the next 2 weeks, with a different list for things I have to keep an eye on to make sure that they don't fall through the cracks. I also block out time for focus work on my calendar. I have to be really defensive about my calendaring because you can get pulled into a lot of meetings. I feel that since the pandemic, work sort of fully remote work ended and we came back to a hybrid workplace, we've kept the worst of both worlds in a sense. And just the amount of meetings that get scheduled can be overwhelming. So saying that no and just blocking out time so that you can't get pulled into meetings, and saying like, no, I don't want to have this meeting while I'm on leave. You can have it without me, or you can wait. It's really tough, but it's something that you have to do. There are also just some times of the year when certain projects are more important and take up more time. And fortunately, I'm part of a department that has been growing. And we have more people in the department now, and that means more folks I can rely on for help to pick up some of my work if I need to focus on a particular project. So both this semester and last semester, I've been working closely with student classes. One was an undergraduate, one is a graduate level class, and in both cases I've been fortunate to have other people step in to assist. I'm also instructor of record for our academic editing and publishing class. And because I was working very closely with this class in triple ADS last semester, our open access publishing manager did a lot of heavy lifting with the academic editing and publishing class. So that, that's just one example. So really seeing yourself as, part of a network of librarians, that you don't have to do it all on your own, has been really valuable for me in managing my desk.
Thanks, Willa. Megan, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you have to be a ruthless project manager. Having project management experience is really, really helpful. And that is something that I got at University of Michigan in my library degree. We had a project management class and I was the project manager. I'm good at it. So take that with a grain of salt. But I also want to underscore what Willa said about there being times when certain things are a higher priority and others. There's a certain seasonality, at least for me, to the work that I do. And so my year sort of breaks down into three pieces. It's fall, spring, and summer. And what is a priority for me in each of those seasons is kind of different. And it doesn't, for me, work out to be what you'd expect. Summer is one of my busiest times of the year as I work with undergraduates, particularly those who are in the transition between high school and college, as well as some of our summer bridge programs and that kind of stuff. In addition to sort of both the internal and external work I do, I also adjunct for the library school here. So spring is also a really busy time for me as I'm teaching a full semester class this semester that I have to find a way to work into all the rest of it. As for how I actually do that, I have a crazy notebook. It's bonkers. There's Post-it notes. It's a whole internal organization system. But I will say there have been two things that have been really critical for me. Well, three things. First is to sit down and define priorities by semester, and then by a sort of month, and then by week. And then the other thing is to actually do reflection on what you've done more often than for your annual review. So I try and do that those 3 seasons, because it can be really easy to feel like, oh, I've done nothing. What did I even do? Why do they pay me for this? And then when you sit down and write down all the things you did, you're like, oh, actually, maybe I can back off a little bit because that seems bonkers how much stuff I just did. And it helps me to scope things a little bit better if I can actually look at what it is that I've done and not just say in my head, but literally write it down, fill up that list. But yeah, having project management skills, it's pretty critical, I think, particularly an academic librarian, to be able to manage your own self. Because while we have managers, some of whom are wonderful and some of whom maybe have room to grow in their own management journey, a lot of the work that we do is managing our own time and our own projects and our own path forward. And so those are really critical skills to have or get comfortable with, I think, to be successful in academic librarianship.
Thank you so much. I took some notes during everything you all said, because I feel like that's an internal struggle. So our next question is, what are some of the challenges that go along with being a librarian? I'm going to send it right back to you, Megan, and then we'll hear from Scott.
Oh, sure. The project management, the feeling like whatever you do is never enough. I would say, so at IU, we have faculty status. We're on a tenure track. So in addition to the instruction sessions and the events that I might participate in and the programs that I work with, I am also responsible for publishing. And that is part of my job and part of what I'm assessed on. And so not allowing that to fall to the bottom of it's really easy to say, I'll just do that later. I'll do that in a quieter time. I'll do that, there's always this mythical other time when that's going to be easy to do. And it never happens. I think that for me, one of the things that I think can be really difficult about working in academia is that I don't come from a family that has a background in academia, that has my parents went to college, but they're business people, and higher education both does and doesn't work like a business. And so it can sometimes be hard to communicate to people why the tenure process works the way it does, and like why you have to do these things, or just even the seasonality of the rhythm of life we live in. Because so for instance, like, because here in Bloomington, the local schools, the K-12 schools, run on a schedule that's very similar to the university schedule. Well, my family back home, my niece and nephew, their schools don't run on that schedule. And so there's a lot of sort of these assumptions that you have to constantly be challenging and asking people to take into account when they're thinking about how to do just sort of like things you consider to be easy, like a family get together, right? Doesn't always work out exactly the same. And it's, but at the same time, there are lots of folks around in the libraries who are in similar positions to you, who might not have family in town, who are, who like get it from that communication standpoint. I don't know. I'm sure others have things to say about what's challenging. Oh, I actually do have one more. I think the thing that's most frustrating to me about being a librarian is feeling like I'm an uncredited middleman between the publisher and the people, wherein I feel like I'm constantly having to apologize to students for why things don't work the way that it seems like they should, and simultaneously having zero power to change that. That's really frustrating to me, because like, I want to do that for you. I want it to work better, differently, faster, slower, more clear. And I can't, though all I can do is try to explain to you why it is the way it is and hope you remember.
Thanks. Scott, do you want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, so when I initially saw this question, I was at first I thought about all of the challenges that sort of made the job to some degree worse, I guess. But then I started thinking about all the challenges that actually make the job better, right? Because I mean, the thing about challenges is that, like, I sort of love challenges, right? I think a lot of us really love challenges. And there's lots of ways in which this work is challenging in a really good way, right? And one of them is that as a profession, I mean, granted, we've already talked about how librarianship is itself an incredibly diverse profession. And I mean, just on this panel, we have a lot of diversity, but like, it's only really scratching the surface of the diversity within libraries. But to generalize, as a profession, I mean, we have really complicated and idealistic goals, right? About somehow providing equitable access to like as much of or all of the information that exists, anywhere in the world, and teaching people how to get that information, et cetera, right? I mean, this is something that is hugely complicated, hugely challenging, but in a really wonderful way that we're striving for, right? So that's a really good challenge. Also, because of the diversity of the field, there are ways of doing librarianship that inevitably interact with something that you're interested in, right? I mean, librarianship is so diverse that it's like, if you happen to be interested, like, say you're interested in geography, right, or maps or whatever, right? I mean, like, Teresa's job is kind of great for you. I wanted to be a historian, but this job that I have now is really wonderful, and you can delve really deeply into these topics as a librarian, and therefore, that's challenging, but in a good way. And then the last way that it's kind of a good challenge that I was thinking of was that there's a need to constantly adapt to our users, our patrons, our audience, whatever you want to think, however you want to think of those people, right? They are constantly changing, and we need to constantly be adapting to them. And that's fun in its own way. It's challenging, but it's also fun. So there's lots of also not so good ways in which the job is challenging. So one of them is the fact that it gets back to this idea of like how multifaceted libraries are, and how there's so many different jobs. And so I'm constantly interacting with people whose jobs I don't understand. Looking at you, Willa. There's so many others, right? I was just emailing somebody today who does some sort of photography, some sort of digitization of materials, and I don't really understand what she does. And also, as a result of that, undoubtedly, I'm interacting with people who don't understand what I do, and that becomes itself a sort of challenge. Then, oh yeah, this is the one. Sorry, I took notes, so I'm going to say "oh" periodically. This is the one that I find the most challenging and the most frustrating, I think, of all, which is that and this is probably especially true within academic libraries, but it might be true in public libraries as well. People constantly think that they know more about libraries, or as much about libraries as you do, right? Within academic libraries, especially, right? You're dealing, this is less true with students. It's a little bit true with graduate students. It's definitely true with faculty. They have worked in libraries for much of their lives. They think that they understand libraries. They've spent countless hours in libraries, they'll tell you, et cetera, et cetera. And so it can be difficult to interact with people who think that they know your job better than you do. And it can create really awkward scenarios, and yeah, challenging scenarios. Really generally, another challenge that I think is important to mention is it's a so-called pink collar profession. There's a historical feminization of librarianship that has had created all sorts of challenges, both historically and in the present. The perception of our job as that we're there to serve within history librarianship. There's this idea of librarians as being handmaidens of history, right? Which is kind of gets at both the idea of service and the feminization. There's an idea that librarians should be working around everyone else's schedule, that as a result of this feminization of labor, we're undercompensated. At IU, I can tell you for a fact, having been co-chair of the Budgetary Affairs Committee for the Bloomington Faculty Council, that we are the lowest, I think I could say this definitively, that we are the lowest compensated unit on campus. And you can look that up in one.iu. And there's also oh yeah, Teresa just put in chat, working 12-month contracts instead of 10 months. And we also get a sort of disingenuous appreciation oftentimes, where you're sort of like thanked out of hand, but not really, without really much desire or to actually understand or appreciate what we do. And then the last thing is, I would encourage you, if you're interested in librarianship as a profession, you look up this article by Fubazi Etar, called "Vocational Law and Librarianship." It's a wonderful read. Just in general, it gets at a lot of things that I'm not going to be able to touch on. But in one of the later sections, there's a quote at the start of a long section is, "Martyrdom is not a long-lasting career." And so this is getting at the idea that there's this idealization of what libraries are and what librarianship is, that leads to this idea that in some ways you should be just kind of happy that you're there to serve, and also that you shouldn't like think about kind of all the structures that kind of went into creating this space, right? Because it's perfect. So how could there be anything wrong with it, right? And that creates all sorts of problems. Oh, thanks Rebecca for putting the link in the chat. Yeah, so we could talk more about that later, but I just want to bring it up.
Thanks so much, Scott. And in addition to that article that Scott mentioned, I think just in general in the library with the lead pipe is a great journal. So check out more articles there. So now let's go into some more positive stuff. What have you enjoyed the most about being a librarian? And Willa, we'll start with you and then go to Teresa.
Sure. So there's a couple of things I'd call out. I really enjoy working with students. I think it's because I don't do it that often, and I love teaching. I really love seeing students respond to tweaks in pedagogy, or saying, I never thought of something that way, or being exposed to a new skill, or having to learn a new skill and use it in service of a particular subject that they're dealing with, has been really eye-opening for them. So I enjoy working with students. Because I'm not a subject specialist, I don't have a department that I'm attached to. I really like Theresa's wording of discipline agnostic, I think. Yeah, so I'm discipline agnostic. So there's not a department that I would be interacting with on a regular basis, because my work serves any department, really. The other part that I've enjoyed is finding various communities in librarianship. So despite the diversity of roles in librarianship itself, it's not ethnically diverse at all. So to find a sense of belonging, it's been really, really great to find the sort of micro communities here on campus of like other West Indian librarians, just to be in a space where I don't have to translate in my head what I want to say, so that I can say it in a way that other people will understand, but just being able to sort of, kick back, relax, and speak without sort of a filter. That's important. I am by no means, I'm not one of those people, and this is not meant to cause offense, who, like, I don't want to bring my whole self to work. Like, please believe me, you don't want to see my authentic self. It does not belong at work. It does not. But there's definitely something to be said for being able to have a space sometimes where you can kick back and not worry about exposing that authentic self. Digital community engagement has also been very valuable. Nikolai is here, and they are very heavily involved in We Here, which is an online community of people of color working in libraries. And there's just so much great work that they do, publishing. There's the We Reads collections, which I really love. There's community studies. I just finished up a community study last fall. And so that's also been a great experience.
Thanks so much, Willa. Teresa, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yeah, similar to Willa, one of my favorite things is working with students. As much as I did not excel at teaching a class full of middle schoolers, I really enjoy working one-on-one with students and with faculty. I think Scott said something about like not having to be the main credit bearing teacher. I also appreciate that. I like the freedom of being able to come in and speak to my strengths and work closely with students. Like often I'll meet with someone multiple times over a semester or over their academic career, and I really enjoy that, like helping someone problem solve through a research problem. And I think that part's really fun without having to deal with all of the like classroom management and administration piece that comes along with teaching. I also really enjoy how collaborative librarianship is. I've worked with many people, like everyone on this panel. We've collaborated in one way or another. People whose jobs I barely understand. And I think it's a way to keep things a little bit interesting, to share the burden of especially the research and service responsibilities of our jobs. And it also just like, this is something that always comes up when interview candidates come and they're like, well, why should I work at IU? And it's always like, well, we have great colleagues. Like, we are probably overworked and underpaid, and there are all kinds of other issues in academia in general. But for the most part, and no offense, Howard, but librarians are a lot happier than most professors I know. I think there's there's a little bit more separation, it seems, between like work life and home life for a lot of our colleagues. And I think striking that kind of work-life balance is maybe a little bit easier. I also really appreciate just the flexibility. Like, we have the benefit of a flexible academic lifestyle, right? Like, I can take a research leave for a couple months at a time. I'm taking a sabbatical in the fall semester to work on a book. There's a lot of those benefits. Like, I'm not clocking in, no one's like checking up on me where I am during the day. It's up to me to get my work done. So that can also kind of go wrong in some cases, but generally you're trusted to do your work and to be a professional, and that's something I try to not take advantage, or try to not lose sight of. Like, my friends who work in tech are paid 3-4 times as much as I am, but they're also working around the clock, and I have no problem saying, sorry, I will answer that tomorrow, which is something that for me is worth it.
Thanks so much, Teresa. I think everyone would have things to say about this one, but we have one more last question before we move on to you answering questions from all of you. This last one is, how do you see the future of librarianship as a profession? And I know Willa and Scott had thought about this, but I think after they answer, we'll kind of throw it out. I know there's some other people who had some thoughts. So Willa, would you like to start?
Yeah. So I don't think librarianship has one future. I think it has many different futures. And so part of that future is going to be experimentation. We see different institutions and different universities sort of experimenting with different models, with how they change to best serve their disciplinary and campus communities. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that shifting. I mean, in the last 5 years, we've seen a lot more functional specialists positions come up in librarianship alongside the subject specialist position. Perhaps we'll see more teams forming with functional and subject specialists. I'd want to see librarianship dig in more to sort of core values in the way we spend our funds with vendors and also with other initiatives that we support. One recent development that I think has been eye-opening is last Friday, there was a summary judgment against the Internet Archive and their model of controlled digital lending that I think reading through the details of that case did surprise a lot of librarians who fully support like the underlying mission of the Internet Archive, which is to sort of, make information as widely available as possible. Like, you're paying for something, how libraries operate. You purchase material and then you make it available to the public. And this experiment that sort of started off as where a library has during the pandemic, as an national emergency library, where a library has a physical copy of the book. You take the physical copy out of circulation and you make a digital copy available, so you're not making more available than what you own. That sort of snowballed out of control in the way so the Internet Archive defined a library patron and monetized just the fact that it's not it doesn't operate the way a traditional library does. So every single page is monetized. Every time somebody borrows, all of that is data being collected and monetized. And essentially the court gave summary judgment against them, which, well, in legal terms, the court is saying you don't have a case, you don't have a defense, and therefore we don't want this to proceed to a full trial because this would be a waste of taxpayers' time and money. That's what a summary judgment means. And of course, they're appealing it, but the court very firmly said that this is the way you've done this, not control digital lending itself, but the way you've done this is definitely a breach of copyright. It is not a fair use. It is not operating within the constraints of Section 107 and 108 of the Copyright Act. So, that was something that's interesting. And I think libraries will have to pay a lot more attention to whether the people that we're doing business with and supporting have the same values that we do.
Thanks, Willa. Scott, do you want to share your thoughts?
Sure, and I am really glad that Willa was the one who talked about the Internet Archive ruling, because I was going to bring it up, but I really don't understand it. So once again, I'm really glad that Willa was able to talk about that. I guess, so from the perspective of people who might be interested in entering the profession of librarianship, I think that one of the important things to note, I guess, especially within academic librarianship, is that we are subject to the rises, falls, changes, etc., of higher education in general, right? And so if you want to know about the future of librarianship, I think that one of the first places to look is within higher education and where you think that that's going, right? And so, I mean, some of the trends that you can see are that there's this fear about the so-called demographic cliff, right? And that, for those of you who might not have heard of that, that's the idea that following as a result, I guess, of the Great Recession, there was a decline in the number of births in the United States, and therefore necessarily there will be fewer students who are going to college, and some perceive this as being a huge concern, and others perceive it as being not so huge a concern. But in any case, it will have some impact on higher education. And the most likely scenario, it seems to me, is that some institutions will fare well and some institutions will fare poorly, right? And the institutions that fare poorly will, librarians, because of the fact that we have the position we do within academia, which is one of where we are not really generating income for the university, right? We are acquiring materials, we are paying staff, we are generally, in the context of IU, other units are taxed basically to give the library money, and that's a model that a lot of universities use to pay for libraries. And so libraries could be hit hard in those institutions that will suffer as a result of the demographic cliff. On the other hand, the institutions that will do well, which is largely the largely a lot of larger universities, that are, to some degree wealthier, et cetera. There could be to some degree a boon for libraries, and in those institutions, I suspect that the ability to be able to speak to, and this is to some degree building on what Willa said, to the ability to speak to a variety of issues, right? To be able to adapt to changes, whether that be in technology, whether that be in the landscape of publishing, et cetera, whether that be in education, and the ways that we perform education, your ability to speak to those kind of like niche areas, for lack of a better word, will be really highly valuable, right? So Willa's background in law could be beneficial for a future librarian, right? If you have experience actually teaching in the classroom, right, that could be, in addition to a library science degree, that could be useful. Also, though, I see a lot of there's constantly been a prediction of like the end of the libraries, right? That all books are going to be ebooks. People are not going to read any print books anymore, and that has gone on for decades and decades, and it hasn't panned out, and I don't see it panning out in the future. So there will be librarians.